I just want to say I really thank the Lord for all of you because you've decided to be here and you've decided to make an effort to be part of this Christian community here and participate in some way. And so I increasingly have come to value that in my life and to be part of a community like this. So I hope that you also experience that as well. And so I thank the Lord that we're here together. I'm reading through the Bible in 5 years, and so you're welcome to join me in that journey. And on your bulletin and on the app, it lists where I'm at right now. And so it's basically a chapter a day, and we alternate going back and forth between the Old and New Testament, so hopefully you get some balance there. And what I do is at the beginning of the week, I read all of those 7 or 8 chapters. Sometimes there's 2 if they're small. Rarely, but once in a while, an extra one's thrown in there. So I read that whole thing, and then I go back and I let the Lord narrow me down into one passage that then I look at more closely for the week. So you don't have to narrow down into the same passage that I do, but the one that I'm giving you on Sunday morning is the one the Lord has brought to my attention. And so He might bring you a different one, and that would be really cool to sit down someday and just have an opportunity to say, well, this is the one the Lord showed me this week. Because there's so much in there that you just will have to go through this another 3 or 4 times, and then we're still just scratching the surface of what the Bible has for us. So right now I'm in Exodus chapter 16, and I'm going to start in verse 1, and I'm going to read through verse 31. Then the whole community of Israel set out from Elim and journeyed into the wilderness of Sin between Elim and Mount Sinai. They arrived there on the 15th day of the 2nd month, 1 month after leaving the land of Egypt. There too the whole community of Israel complained about Moses and Aaron. If only the Lord had killed us back in Egypt, they moaned. There we sat around pots filled with meat and ate all the bread we wanted. But now you have brought us into this wilderness to starve us all to death. Then the Lord said to Moses, look, I'm going to rain down food from heaven for you. Each day the people can go out and pick up as much food as they need for that day. I will test them in this to see whether or not they will follow my instructions. On the 6th day they will gather food, and when they prepare it, there will be twice as much as usual. So Moses and Aaron said to all the people of Israel, by evening you will realize it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt, and in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, because He has heard your complaints, which are against Him, not against us. What have we done that you should complain about us? Then Moses added, the Lord will give you meat to eat in the evening, and bread to satisfy you in the morning, for He has heard all your complaints against Him. What have we done? Yes, your complaints are against the Lord, not against us. Then Moses said to Aaron, announce this to the entire community of Israel. Present yourselves before the Lord, for He has heard your complaining. And as Aaron spoke to the whole community of Israel, they looked out toward the wilderness. There they could see the awesome glory of the Lord in the cloud. Then the Lord said to Moses, I have heard the Israelites' complaints. Now tell them, in the evening you will have meat to eat, and in the morning you will have bread, all the bread you want. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God. That evening vast numbers of quail flew in and covered the camp, and the next morning the area around the camp was wet with dew. When the dew evaporated, a flaky substance as fine as frost blanketed the ground. The Israelites were puzzled when they saw it. What is it? They asked each other. They had no idea what it was. And Moses told them, it is the food the Lord has given you to eat. These are the Lord's instructions. Each household should gather as much as it needs. Pick up 2 quarts for each person in your tent. So the people of Israel did as they were told. Some gathered a lot, some only a little. But when they measured it out, everyone had just enough. So those who gathered a lot had nothing left over, and those who gathered only a little had enough. Each family had just what it needed. Then Moses told them, do not keep any of it until morning. But some of them didn't listen and kept it until the morning. By then it was wet, was full of maggots and had a terrible smell. Moses was very angry with them. After this, the people gathered the food morning by morning, each family according to its need, and as the sun became hot, the flakes they had not picked up melted and disappeared. On the 6th day, they gathered twice as much as usual, 4 quarts for each person instead of 2. Then all the leaders of the community came and asked Moses for an explanation. He told them, "This is what the Lord commanded. Tomorrow will be a day of complete rest, a holy Sabbath day set apart for the Lord. So bake or boil as much as you want today and set aside what is left for tomorrow." So they put some aside until morning, just as Moses had commanded. And in the morning the leftover food was wholesome and good, without maggots or odor. Moses said, Eat this food today, for today is a Sabbath day dedicated to the Lord. There will be no food on the ground today. You may gather the food for 6 days, but the 7th day is the Sabbath. There will be no food on the ground that day. Some of the people went out anyway on the 7th day, but they found no food. The Lord asked Moses, "How long will these people refuse to obey my commands and instructions? They must realize that the Sabbath is the Lord's gift to you. That is why he gives you a 2-day supply on the 6th day, so there will be enough for 2 days. On the Sabbath day, you must each stay in your place. Do not go out to pick up food on the 7th day." So the people did not gather any food on the 7th day. The Israelites called the food manna. It was white like coriander seed, and it tasted like honey wafers. I found this in a interesting passage, and what stuck out to me is God said this is going to be a test for them. And I don't know about you, but I've always considered that kind of a negative. Never liked tests. I always felt like the tests wasn't necessarily for me, to benefit me, but it was just to be able to show that I had learned something. And then I thought, well, why is God testing them? He knows their hearts. He knows what they're going to do. Why does he need to test them? It must not be for his sake. It must be for theirs. And I don't think God tests us because he wants to know what's in our heart. He tests us because he wants us to know what's in our hearts and what we need to work on. It gave me, as I thought about this, maybe that was something in my educational background that I kind of missed, that those tests were actually opportunities for me to learn as much as it was for somebody to know what I had or hadn't learned. Sometimes the way we look at education is probably not as helpful to us as it could be. But that's not really what I want to talk about, how our educational system has failed. But I do want to talk about how God teaches us. And sometimes when he teaches us, he tests us because he shows us things we still need to learn or learn better. So this is a 2-part test that he gives them. There's 2 parts to this test. The first part is he gives them just enough for 1 day. It's interesting because it says they went out and they gathered. Some gathered a lot and some gathered a little, even though Moses told them right up front how much they were supposed to gather. They didn't really listen to him. Poor Moses. But some of them tried to gather more than they needed, and some were kind of lazy and probably didn't gather enough. But what happened? What did God do? He worked it out so everybody just had exactly what they needed. And then some of them decided, well, I'm going to keep some left over for tomorrow. Again, they didn't listen. And in the morning, it was all full of maggots and smelled awful. So they couldn't eat it. So that was the first test. Could they figure out what was just enough for 1 day? And what was God testing? And what did he want them to learn? And so this is what I came up with. This is how I interpret it. That God wanted them to learn to trust him and what he said. Can they trust God enough for today and that He's going to provide for them tomorrow? That was the test. Are they going to trust Him for today and they trust that He's going to provide for them again tomorrow? So we have this problem with what is enough and when is enough, and they had the same problem. Because I have here reasons we want more. And these are just things that I came up with. You might think of more reasons why we want more. I think part of it's security. We feel like if I have more than I need, then I'm better off. I'm more secure. That I have some for tomorrow makes me feel more secure about tomorrow. Right? It makes me feel like, then I know I'm going to be okay tomorrow. I don't have to trust God because I know in myself I'm okay because I gathered extra and I have extra and I worked hard, so I'm going to be okay for tomorrow. And really it's about control and having power over the future. Makes us feel better. I think we need to be careful about this concept of taking security from something that God provides, rather than putting our security on Him. Because I believe when we make something else God, by trusting in it rather than God, we've made it a what? An idol. This is another thing as I was listening to a lecture this week, the lecturer made this statement that idols always require a sacrifice. Idols always require a sacrifice. If we're trusting in something other than God to provide our security, there's going to be a cost to pay. Now, the cost here was very simple. It got all maggoty and smelly, and they had to deal with that. Pretty low cost. Sometimes the cost for idols is much higher. If you're a workaholic and you're using work as to give you fulfillment and security and to give you more, you're going to be sacrificing your family, and that's a really high cost for security. And there's all kinds of other things that we can put in that place to give us things like security and significance and control. And we put these things there, but it's always going to cost something, and usually it's going to cost something as having to do with the other people in your life and in your community around you. Or it's going to cost you something that maybe comes down the road. We need to be careful. And I believe this is what God's trying to teach them. You can trust me for every day. You have to trust me for every day. If you try to control the future, you're not trusting me. Now, sometimes, so we get to the second test, sometimes God gives us extra to account for when we need it the next day. Right? And in this specific instance, He gave them twice as much on the day before the Sabbath, so on the Sabbath they didn't have to go out and gather. So the second test is, do I trust when He does give me extra, and that extra comes from Him, that I can actually stop and rest and use that? We see this I see this interesting, as being a pastor for a long time. Churches, like, every once in a while God will bless us with more income and more resources, and our temptation and we think, well, let's put some away for a rainy day. Let's put some away because God gives us extra. We don't have a need that we really need to put it for right now. Let's put it away so we have it when we need it. You know what I've noticed sometimes happens? We have a really hard time recognizing when a rainy day is. And we start using that extra as security. We start using that extra as something, and it becomes kind of an idol, and we don't ever really use it like God intended us to, even when something that might be legitimate comes up, because we're afraid that if we use it, it won't be there anymore. I saw my grandmother, bless her heart. My grandparents worked hard for what they had. And I remember after my grandfather passed away, my grandmother was retired, and she had plenty. She could have really done some good things. She did do good things for others, but she could have lived differently than she did. But she kept sacrificing because that was what she did. And it's like, I want to leave something for my kids. I want to leave something for my kids. By the time she died, her kids were retired and had plenty too, and they didn't need what she had. And then they had to deal with all the stuff that she hoarded for all those years. Clean her house out. Saving, I'm not saying don't save, but I'm saying we still need to have a godly attitude to what we save. Because sometimes God actually wants you to spend for good reasons the stuff that He's given you to save. Because if you're taking it and you're using that and you're worshiping that as an idol, that's not what God wants you to do. So reasons that we can't rest, reasons that we can't actually use what God has planned ahead for us. Well, and these are just, again, some ideas that I came up with. You probably have more. Poor planning, and it doesn't really tell us this, but maybe some of those people just didn't gather extra the day before because they didn't trust God enough or they didn't pay attention to what God was doing. You know, Moses said, okay, today gather twice as much. Maybe they just didn't pay attention. Hey, we've been gathering this much for 6 days. It didn't matter how much we gather, we always had enough, and so we should gather. So they get into the routine of doing the same thing every day, and it comes to the 6th day, and they go, okay, we're going to do the same thing. Well, then if they didn't plan ahead for the 7th day, then they didn't have anything, right? It could have just been poor planning. Now, I don't know too many people who could not eat for one day and it would. I mean, most of us can survive one day easily. In fact, probably close to 100% of the population can survive without eating for one day. So, the consequence here isn't huge. But they felt it, I'm sure, right? If they didn't plan ahead and they went out to gather and there wasn't anything there, I'm sure they felt it. Hopefully they learned. You listen to what Moses says, you listen to what God says, and you trust Him. They had to learn that. And again, we go back to this control and power thing. Somehow our routine, and I'm this way, sometimes routine makes me feel in control. I like my routine. I like that I just do the same thing all the time and I don't have to think about it. It makes me feel good. I like it. I will eat the same thing for breakfast for months. My kids think I'm crazy. But I like it. It's easy. It's my routine. And I can miss opportunities because I got to do it this way, because that's the way I always do it. Now, I'm not sure 6 days is enough for them to really develop a routine, but for some people it's like, okay, I got it. This is how it works, and they stop listening to the exceptions. Right? It's a way we control things and have power. I want to go back to, I missed one up there, the idea that more is better, right? I think this is a uniquely American concept that we culturally buy into. If a little bit is good, more is better. If one is good, 5 must be better. If a 1-bedroom house is good, a 5-bedroom, 6-bedroom house is even better. we have this weird concept that we think more is better. And I want to challenge you to think about that next time that kind of goes through your head, because more isn't always better. I grew up in a time where food was plentiful. It wasn't better for me. I had to learn how to know what was enough when it comes to food, because more wasn't better. Sometimes more isn't better, because when we have more, it's harder to trust God for what we need. So I have a couple questions here. Has God given us enough? I find our world and our culture fascinating, because most of us have more than enough of just about everything. I have more than enough food, I have more than enough clothing, I have more than enough shelter, I have more than enough transportation, I have more than enough. But you know what has happened in our culture? What's the number one problem in America today? And even the Surgeon General will tell you this. What's the number one problem that we have in America today? And it's gotten even worse since the pandemic, and it's not COVID. Do you know what the number one problem is? Across generations, across age groups, loneliness. Loneliness. People are exponentially becoming more and more lonely. Why? Because we live in a culture where we have so much more than enough, and we worship that so much that the sacrifice we've made is relationships. This is my theory. We've sacrificed our relationships, we've sacrificed our groups, we've sacrificed our being part of something bigger than ourselves to get more of what we want. And it's killing us. It's killing us. Has God given us enough? I would say yes, but that's a question for you. Has God given you enough? Has He given us enough? And how much is that? How much do you really need? Do you ever thought about that? How much do I really need? I like watching tiny house, the tiny house shows where people build tiny houses, because it fascinates me how little people can survive on and deal with it as far as a home. I'm still working on that. Someday, my vision is someday living on a sailboat. I got to get rid of a lot of stuff to make it there. I don't know if I'll make it or not, but it's kind of this dream that I have. It's like, how much stuff do I really need? Has God given us enough? And why do I want more? I think if I realize I have enough, then I have to look in my heart and I have to let God test me and say, why do I want more? Has more of whatever it is become an idol for me? Am I using it for security, for identity, for making me feel better? There's all kinds of things that God does for us that we put on idols in our lives. Why do you want more? Why do you think you need more? That's another conversation between need and want. We have a very poor concept of what we really need. Why do you want more? Why do we want more? And then the last question I have down here is, can we trust Him enough to rest? Can I trust God enough to be content with what He's given me? Can I trust Him that much? And trust that if I need more, He's going to give me more. Do I have enough faith to live that way? Then I added something down here this morning that I didn't put on here that I think helps us with this. I think there's one thing that really, really helps us with knowing and being content. And it's one word. It's called thankfulness. Am I thankful for what I have? Because when I'm thankful for what I have, I realize that when I really become thankful, when I really focus on being thankful, what happens to my desire for more? If I'm truly thankful, often my desire for more will go away. Because I realize I've got more than enough. I'm so thankful. So I want us to think about, as we go, to ask ourselves these questions. And maybe if I have to do without for something for a little bit, maybe God has given me a test. But what is enough? And when is enough? And am I trusting God enough to rest and trust Him for the next day? And am I really thankful? Am I really thankful for what I have? Am I really thankful for those around me? Am I really thankful? And so I'm just going to close in prayer, and then we're going to, I think, sing a very appropriate song together for this. So, Lord, I thank you so much. Again, I want to use that word. I thank you so much because I have so much. I have so many resources compared to most of the world and most of human history. Lord, I thank you that I don't have to worry about having enough to eat today, tomorrow, or probably a long time down the road. Lord, I thank you that I have more than enough clothing to wear, so much that sometimes it's hard to decide. Lord, I thank you that I have a secure roof over my head and that I'm warm in the winter and cool in the summer and I'm comfortable. Lord, I thank you. And Lord, I pray that you would remind me when I feel like I need more of anything that I just need to trust you and start from a place of contentment. And Lord, as we wrestle with these things in our lives and as we wrestle with these feelings and these pulls that we get in these directions, I just pray that your Holy Spirit would speak to us, encourage us, help us to trust you more. And Lord, if you need to test us, test us. Help us to see what's in our hearts. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Let's stand again as we sing our last song.